Hey there and welcome back to Rimworld. My name is Pete and today we complete the second episode of our Rimworld Anomaly Sea Ice Challenge with the transhumanist Paragons of Pandroth. If you are wondering why we are starting off pause today, then that is because before we begin I want to say thank you, not only for the love you showed that first episode last week, but also for the overwhelming support for the Polar Bears International fundraiser. Originally, I thought it would simply be a nice idea to use the Sea Ice series to raise a couple $100 for a good cause, and while I was of course fully prepared to match the $250 goal I had initially set and have done so, I did not expect that goal to be reached mere minutes after the video went live. And I certainly did not expect it to be surpassed by a factor of 10 just a day later, so thank you for that. As you have perhaps already seen on this video, I have decided to keep the fundraiser going for the rest of the series, just to see how far we can take it. Suffice it to say, it has already exceeded my expectations. And with that, let's talk about what happened so far. Last time we left off, after splitting 5 pawns off of the Believers of Boyo, the siblings Ellie and Elpis, their grandfatherly protector Maniac, Sanguiphage Vulek, and psychopath scientist Nazim. Founding the transhumanist Paragons of Pandroth, the 5 of them decided to settle on the sea ice and went on to attack a pirate settlement for resources immediately. And this settlement is where something extremely interesting happened that I completely overlooked, and judging by the comments on the last episode, all of you did too, had it not been for a friendly message sent to me by user HowdyChap. At exactly 19 minutes and 7 seconds in the last episode, we have this screen here as we load our drop pods, and we can see a familiar name here, Kralith. Now, for those of you that don't know, Kralith was a character in our last series, the sister of our Dr. Kevin, and apparently she died in that pirate camp. However, she did not die because of us, she was in fact already dead in a gibbet cage when we arrived. Our orbital bombardment targeter simply destroyed that cage. And so the masterwork plasteel spear that we brought back home from the raid, that one actually also belonged to her. It was crafted by Wyatt if I remember correctly, and thus remains with us as a small relic of our past series in the jungle. Now, don't ask me how Kralith actually made it to that pirate camp before we did, or how she got herself killed in the first place. I just wanted to quickly point all of this out, because it is one of those Rimworld moments where the game just plays around with people and creates funny and sometimes also very cruel coincidences. Now, be that as it may, let's leave all of that behind us and focus on the here and now. We also still have 2 elephants with us, Knight Narsil and Great Alexander, both currently starving and freezing to death. So Maniac now feeding Great Alexander those psychoid leaves just to prevent the worst from happening immediately, and about that freezing part we can perhaps also do something, as Ellie does in fact still have 2 extra components in her inventory, and so our Sanguiphage crafter and constructor Vulek can quickly put up a heater. Now, considering that outside temperatures are still at minus 41 degrees Celsius, it likely won't keep us nice and cozy. It should, however, keep us warm enough so that nobody dies of hypothermia, something that our wall torch was just not capable of. After patching up a few frostbite wounds, Vulek then also constructs a small steel game board. Yes, considering our current situation, this might seem like a waste of steel, but frequent recreation activities will be incredibly important over these first few days. It is one of the reasons why I have actually adapted the biphasic sleep and recreation schedule that Adam vs. Everything also uses very often. It most likely won't prevent any and all mental breaks, but hopefully it helps us ensure that we don't see the major ones that often. Sanguiphage Vulek then also helping himself to a hemogen pack, courtesy of Nazim. This has the added benefit of providing roughly 10% of nutrition, so we don't have to step into cannibal territory just yet. Very fittingly then, Psychopath Nazim suffers the first mental break of the series. The pain from the frostbite is now making him wander around in a daze. Hopefully he makes it back inside before he makes the situation any worse. Elephant Great Alexander, meanwhile, has actually recovered so far that he can walk again and immediately consumes the remaining psychoid leaves. This, however, was the last of our animal food, so unless we acquire more from somewhere, I foresee dark times ahead. Now, with the next batch of steel from our deep drill then, we have enough resources for the next step in our plan to survive out here, and that would be to construct a nutrient paste dispenser. Together with a single hopper for 15 steel, this now unlocks the most resource-efficient way of making meals in the game, requiring only 6 units of meat or plant matter to make a filling meal, albeit a rather tasteless one. Very importantly then, as transhumanists, our pawns won't actually get mood penalties for this. So as long as we have power and just a handful of raw ingredients, food will be available. Now, unfortunately, those raw ingredients have just run out, but in a cruel twist of fate, we might now be able to acquire more, as Nightnatal has just starved. I think it's safe to say that all of you saw that coming. For role-playing purposes, I did not want to slaughter the two of them immediately, and Great Alexander here is actually also recovering from his malnutrition. Still, without some divine intervention or Randy doing Randy things, I think it was very clear from the beginning that we would not be able to sustain 2 elephants out on the sea ice. Now, to make the most out of Nightnatal's demise, we are constructing a butcher table immediately. That's why we brought those 20 additional units of wood back from the pirate base. For some reason, the butcher table is one of the few production facilities that cannot be constructed out of steel alone. Psychopath Nazim, meanwhile, is still wandering, now in the early stages of hypothermia. He has already dropped his sniper rifle and will hopefully return home soon, where Ellie, the best cook in the colony, has just finished butchering Nightnatal. And of course, we don't want our colonists to eat the meat raw. Instead, let's make sure they use the much more efficient nutrient-paced meals. Although, even using those, Natal's death here will not sustain us for that long, because when she died, she was starving and also still had several frostbite wounds, both of which drastically reducing the amount of meat we were able to obtain. Just to illustrate this, normally a healthy elephant drops around 500 meat, even on this difficulty. Nightnatal meanwhile dropped a meager 133. However, what she did also drop is elephant leather, so we are now constructing some bedrolls. Obviously, we could also wait until we have enough steel for proper beds, but we will need steel for so many other projects that we don't want to clog up our construction queue. And Vulek is also good enough at construction work that he should get good results here reliably, so our colonists will be comfortable enough either way. The steel we save doing this then goes into the construction of a hoopstone ring, offering a second mode of recreation for our pawns, which once again will be important to keep everyone's moods from sinking too low. And so, at least for the immediate moment, we have our basic needs taken care of. We have food, a somewhat comfortable temperature, and a steady supply of steel. And we are also a good chunk into the second episode and have not yet resorted to cannibalism. And unfortunately for Great Alexander, we are planning to keep it that way. As you can see, our second elephant too is running out of food. This will once again begin a starvation process that we would like to get ahead of. At this point, I think our colonists know how little meat was left on Nightnatal, and so even though her mother Squigs would be very unhappy about this, Ellie now puts an end to Great Alexander too, which then bumps our meat reserves back up to about 500 units, and this should hopefully last us for some time to come. So the sea ice demanding its first sacrifices, although for now, thankfully, no nasty surprises. And hopefully we can keep that trend going, as we are actually not done exploiting the biotech DLC for resources. However, to acquire those, we first need to construct a simple research bench. 100 units of steel will do, and we can deconstruct it immediately afterwards, so it's not much of an investment. However, we can now use it to decrypt that mechanoid transponder that we recovered from the ancient exostrider that we destroyed last episode. This now unlocks the Mechanoid Transport quest, the first in the Mechanitor quest line. The Mechanitor also added by the Biotech DLC, and we did not actually explore it at all in our last series. Mechanitors are described here as people who can create and control mechanoids to work and fight for them. However, in order for us to be able to do so, we need to acquire a mechlink. Coincidentally, one such mechlink is located on the Mechanoid Transport ship here. However, it is still implanted into the long-dead body of its owner, and the ship is also not entirely unguarded, although we should hopefully be able to deal with a single scyther. As Vulek then already gets to deconstructing the research bench, the Mechanitor ship crashes, and this will actually be a lovely way for us to obtain some more resources. Not only can the ship itself be deconstructed, it also drops some steel slag chunks. And right next to the scyther here, we do have the dead body of the previous Mechanitor, Mechlink, still installed in their brain. So, with the research bench deconstructed and half of the steel reclaimed, Vulek gets going. Thanks to the glucosoid rush that is still active from death resting back with the believers of Boyo, he can now actually outrun a scyther. So, equipped with a charge rifle, he should hopefully be able to handle this on his own. And indeed, the mech is dead, and with that we can now freely grab the mech link without being attacked. We do not require any special procedures for this, just clicking on the pawn will do. And we will actually also turn Vulek here into our first Mechanitor. Someone with a good crafting skill is just absolutely necessary for this role in my opinion. Not to mention that his backgrounds as SteamWorld Tinker and Navy Tech Officer actually fit incredibly well. Don't worry though, you can actually have multiple Mechanitors, so it's not like Vulek will have to hog the spotlight for the rest of the series. Now, the mechanics surrounding the Mechanitor, they are, well, not overly complex, but they would require some explanation. For now, I think it suffices to say that Vulek now has something called bandwidth. The higher this rating is, and it can be raised substantially, the more powerful mechs he can control, all because of the mech link in his brain, which cannot be removed unless Vulek dies, and, well, considering that he is a sanguiphage, that might prove difficult. Now, I'll be honest, primarily we did all of this just to acquire some more resources, in particular the 5 components over here. The dead Mechanitor here also having some useful stuff in their inventory, although unfortunately Vulek himself will refuse to haul any of it back. Luckily, he also won't have to, because as part of becoming a Mechanitor, we have also just received our first mech for free. A small lifter mech has just been sent our way, and it will do exactly what the name suggests, hauling stuff back and forth. We can also give it a new name, so as always, let's pick one from the list of patron supporters in the naming rights tier and above. This time we are going with Rico, so congratulations and welcome to the sea ice. Now, the most important thing we need to know about Rico at this point is that it doesn't really have any particular needs apart from energy. As Rico rolls around to do its hauling, it will consume this energy, and I imagine that Rico will do so for quite a bit, as its temperature resistance of -100°C makes it the perfect candidate out here. The only downside is that just like with hauler animals, we can't actually manually assign it what to haul. Thankfully though, Rico here agrees that the components have priority. Now, we'll have to talk about the issue of recharging Rico in just a moment. For now, Vulek creates a masterwork bedroll, and as you can see, we have also already put down the blueprints for a fabrication bench. This will be another very important step in becoming self-sufficient out here on the sea ice. And with the extra 5 components coming in here, we actually now have more than we need for it. The only thing we are still missing at the moment is steel, but give it some time. We currently actually have everyone on drilling duty, so as soon as Maniac steps off, someone else can take his place. With what little steel we already have, we then begin the first base expansion. Conveniently enough, the nutrient paste dispenser can actually be used as a wall section for this, although unfortunately at this point the psychic soothe that started last episode also comes to an end, so over the next few hours I'd imagine Ellie will see her mood drop quite rapidly. Our bigger and better base then coming together quite nicely, and now actually also big enough to house a fabrication bench. But before we get that going, let's construct a single steel end table, which we can then neatly position 4 of our bedrolls around, so that all of them receive the 5% comfort bonus. The end table itself then also of excellent quality, thus providing a bit of extra beauty, and it now increases the comfort rating of all of those good quality bedrolls up to over 80%, which is the cutoff where our colonists receive a +8 mood bonus for being extremely comfortable. A few moments later then, with heater, butcher table and deep drill rearranged, we can then in fact place the fabrication bench inside of our shack, although of course we still need to construct it, but that will only be a matter of time. What was also only a matter of time was our first raid, and now it's here. And right away we're having to deal with drop pod pirates, 2 groups of them, one consisting of 3 enemies and one consisting of 5. And they do also carry some guns, although nothing long range, so with sniper rifles on both Maniac and Nazim we should have the upper hand here. And indeed, the power of a legendary quality sniper rifle on full display here. Maniac and Nazim are just one-shotting these guys. Eventually, a single enemy manages to get into range of our other 3 colonists, who promptly tear them to shreds and send the group packing. For good measure, our sharpshooters then also down enemy number 5, who is promptly stripped and then carved into by Vulek. Blood-feeding round number 2 then with the usual results, but of course that won't stop our sanguiphage. As Vulek then begins the construction of the fabrication bench, the other, smaller group of pirates begins their assault, and unfortunately, just in that moment, Maniac suffers a crisis of belief. His certainty in the Paragons of Pandroth has dropped significantly, and to make things worse, he has now also hidden in his room, which means we'll have to tackle this part of the fight without him. Luckily though, 3 enemies are not too difficult to dispose of, and once again we are going for full completion here and take down number 3 as well. Loot-wise then, we sadly don't get anything too crazy from them. Their gear and weaponry is of course far inferior to ours, or in case of the gear, tainted. What little there is, mostly medicine and go juice, will be hauled back though, as Volek finally finishes the fabrication bench, and with that we can now make our own components. At this point though, we are starting to run into a bit of a power problem. Not only because our number of electrical devices is increasing, but also because we are actually very close to the South Pole, and so we are fast approaching that period of the year where the sun won't be shining at all. So to diversify our power production, we are now constructing a wind turbine, and while we are gathering the resources for it, let's clean up the battlefield a bit. Let's get those corpses out of sight to avoid mood penalties, while our lifter Rico will also bring back all of those steel slag chunks. Afterwards then, it's time to assign our first role, that of moral guide, the transcendent one. And while Ellie here has the highest social skill in the colony, I don't think she is the most suitable candidate, at least not for now, and that's because of her too smart trait here, which drastically increases her mental break threshold. Becoming moral guide, however, will also decrease her mood because it increases expectations, and that is why we are once again trusting Volek to take on this role, because he actually has a lower than average mental break threshold because of his steadfast trait, and in addition he is also an optimist, so the increased expectations will be somewhat countered. And why are we adding this mood penalty onto him in the first place? Well, it's to get rid of another mood penalty for everyone else, as all 5 of our pawns are currently demanding a transcendent one, so performing this ritual will also remove the -5 mood penalty. And his first task as Transcendent One will be, no, not to haul the butcher table outside to make some room inside. Instead, with Maniac's mental break coming to an end, Volek can now use his Reassure ability, resulting in a substantial certainty increase of 16%, making sure that Maniac remains focused on what's important. And speaking of what's important, this is a Rimworld Anomaly series, so now that we have taken care of the bare necessities and are basically just waiting for more steel to come in, let's begin studying that monolith. And we will do so with none other than Psychopath Nazim. The monolith's dark metallic surface is warm to the touch, and Nazim thinks he can hear a faint hum emanating from inside. The lines on its dusty surface seem to squirm in unsettling patterns. Nazim focuses on the shapes, trying to uncover their meaning. The hum strengthens. The shapes begin to flow in Nazim's vision, but the surface isn't changing. Power begins to uncoil in the empty space all around. A black shape is forming in his mind, the anomaly is stirring. This is essentially our last warning that if we proceed here, the Anomaly DLC will be properly activated, and of course that is exactly what we want to do. So, the monolith has transformed, it is now officially a void monolith, and as a result we have now unlocked a lot of the Anomaly DLC's features. To get us started, we have received this quest right here, the Anomaly Monolith, where we can read that apparently the monolith can reach different levels, and in order for it to reach the next one, we need to uncover entities, whatever those may be. On top of that, we have now also unlocked a secondary research menu, all of the projects here entirely independent of regular research. To make progress, we need to study entities or the monolith itself, and our very first Anomaly project will be Void Provocation, as this will allow us to reliably discover new entities, and that is one of the main ways to make progress in this DLC. Once we confirm it, we can also see a familiar progress bar in the bottom left corner. Over the next few days, we will fill this as we slowly start studying the monolith. As you can see, this is a task that can be toggled on and off, and obviously we will send Nazim to get going immediately. However, life won't be quite that simple for the next few days. As a result of activating the monolith, a grey pall has set over the ice sheet, and in a few short moments this will actually start reducing the mood of everyone exposed to it. However, as far as I'm aware, it does not actually reduce light levels, so at least our solar panel will remain unaffected. With 0.4 points of research in quick succession, Nazim then makes quick progress towards completing our first project. However, and this is where Anomaly research differs from regular research, once a certain amount of study has been done, we can't do any more. In this case, the monolith can be studied for 2 points every 2 days, so it will take some time until Void Provocation here is unlocked. In the meantime, the Grey Pall exposure comes with varying mood penalties. For pawns who spent their time inside, it's not quite so bad, but of course, locking everyone into the shack for the next few days will come with its very own problems, as this Grey Pall will actually last for quite some time. As you can see though, our solar panel has not ceased to operate and is now reinforced by a wind turbine, and with that we should now have enough components to fire up the fabrication bench. Our wall torch has also gone out, which means it's completely dark inside our shack, except for a very small 1 tile radius around our heater, which is why we have it placed right next to the fabrication bench and the deep drill, just so we don't get any further work speed penalties from darkness. Now at this point, our big master plan to survive out here on the sea ice is moving into its next phase. What we need to do next is to build up a bit more of a power supply, and then it's time to start focusing on food, and that means hydroponics. All of that will of course require plenty more steel and components, and well, we only have the 1 deep drill and constructing a second one is not really necessary, I think. So instead, let's do something interesting here. With the remaining elephant leather, we will now construct a kneel sheet. Not only will this beautify our shelter a bit, it will also serve as a quality improvement for rituals. And so, to perhaps somewhat counter the Grey Paul here, let's have ourselves a Pandrothian party. Despite the poor overall ritual quality, there is about a 60% chance that it will be either fun or unforgettable, both of which would give us an ideology development point as well as a small mood bonus for everyone involved. In addition, having Ellie perform the ritual also gives her a chance to improve her social skill. Performing it with Vulek would also not give us any extra bonuses to ritual quality. So with Ellie perhaps destined for some sort of leadership role down the line, it might be a good idea to prepare her any way we can. In addition, the Pandrothian party will also give our pawns a chance to socialize, and especially Maniac did have some rocky relationships to start off the series, so I suppose this can't hurt. And there we go, our very first Pandrothian party is actually unforgettable, so our pawns receive a lovely +8 mood bonus for the next 6 days, not to mention that we grab our first 2 ideology development points. So perhaps a sign that this playthrough is destined for great things. Either way, a few hours later we have enough steel and components to build our first battery, and we will most likely require multiple of them if we want to sustain a sizable hydroponic setup. Around this time then, I also noticed that an Arctic wolf had wandered onto the map, although we will most likely not need to run over to hunt it right away. Once it gets hungry, it will probably come for our meat reserves, as we have all of those still left out in the open. And so the day remains largely uneventful. In the evening, Nazim, the donor of yet another Hemogen pack, and a short while later we also queue up the construction of wind turbine number 2. With this setup, we should now have plenty of power coming in, that is if we have wind. For the moment at least, it is enough to restart our ground-penetrating scanner, because sooner or later the steel vein here will run out, and I think we should have our next location scouted well before that happens. On the next morning then, Lifter Rico has completed all of its long-range hauling duties, and with only 16% of its energy remaining, now would be the time to recharge it. However, we do not have the necessary device for that yet. As a matter of fact, we would still need to complete a research project to unlock it, so at least for the moment we have no other choice but to send Rico to dormant self-charge. In this mode it will very slowly regenerate energy at 1% per day, and obviously that is something that we want to do inside of our base, just to keep our small mech friend safe. Apart from that, the day remains uneventful. In the evening we can see Nazim once again studying the Monolith. Once again, I think his mad scientist background is just absolutely perfect for this role, not to mention that his level 15 intellectual skill also benefits. With 2 more points of research done then, we only have 1 more left to complete until Void Provocation is finally unlocked, but first of all the map finally clears as the Grey Paul vanishes, and with that the mood of our colonists should improve ever so slightly. In the meantime, our base receives just a very minor expansion. I know that in the long run it would be more efficient to go bigger right from the start here, but for the moment we need to conserve resources as best as we can. Just in that moment then, a transport pod crashes on the ice sheet, and coincidentally we have inside a member of the Pollution Gang, the group of waster pirates that we attacked at the beginning of the series. And well, considering that they captured and killed Krayleth, and that this pawn here is really not all that useful, Vulek will now use them to completely replenish his Hemogen. Before they perish, we can also strip them, and then 1 final blood feed will deal the killing blow. And while he's out and about, Vulek might as well also take out the Arctic Wolf. As you can see, he is still substantially faster than the animal, and a few blasts from the charge rifle are enough to take it out. With the butcher table then temporarily placed back inside, Ellie can get to chopping, and even though this gives us a meat amount worth about 10 meals, we will of course not be able to rely on hunting for any substantial amount of time. With more steel and components coming in, we then also construct a second heater. For our hydroponics farm we will most likely need it anyway, as temperatures slightly higher than the freezing point obviously won't cut it if we want to grow crops. Following that, we also spend a bit more steel to construct a small airlock, just so we don't get as much of a temperature drop-off whenever someone enters or exits the shelter. A few moments later then, the first all-important piece for our hydroponics setup is constructed, a sun lamp. Although without any active hydroponics basins, it's best to leave it turned off at the moment. After all, it does consume roughly 3000 watts. Nonetheless, we are making good progress, roughly doubling the size of our shelter here. The space here should suffice for about 10 hydroponics basins, which, as you can see, we begin constructing pretty much immediately. I also thought it best to bring the battery inside for this. Left outside it might be vulnerable to raiders or the weather, and we only need to place 3 tiles of conduit to make it connect to everything. On the following morning then, cargo pods begin the day, although inside we only find some dye, probably not worth traveling through -50 degrees for, although Nazim is moving about anyway, as 2 snow hares have appeared. Back home, meanwhile, the sun lamp has officially been turned on and Maniac is planting the first rice plant. If power becomes an issue, we can always turn the lamp off, but the basins should keep running. And if all goes according to plan, then in a few days we should have some rice coming in. In addition, Nazim also successfully hunts the second snow hare and in the evening continues studying the monolith, and after a few moments that now unlocks void provocation. Now, we do have one more point of research left on the monolith for today, but before we spend it, my question to you would be, what would you like us to spend it on? As you can see, we could continue down the path of void provocation. I have a feeling that especially the ability to draw animals might be extremely useful, but we could also immediately jump the queue towards advanced psychic rituals, allowing us to draw in even more powerful entities. Bioferrite harvesting and entity containment, meanwhile, those two will be very necessary very soon. You'll see why in a moment, as we now put down a psychic ritual spot. However, that is actually easier said than done, as we need a substantial amount of space around it, and that leaves us with no choice but to place it outside in the cold. And because of those temperatures, there is actually only one person here with enough warm clothing to perform the ritual. His name is Elpis, and he will now psychically commune with the void. Yes, no chanters, resulting in an absolutely abysmal ritual quality, so it is pretty much guaranteed that Elpis will fall into a psychic coma afterwards. However, that will only last for a few hours, and the effects of the ritual will happen either way. So, the void provocation has been completed and Elpis has indeed fallen into a short psychic coma. We are warned here to prepare for what comes next, so we should have our first entities appear very soon. As you can see then, Elpis almost back up on his feet, and that's when it happens. We are now being attacked by Gorehulks. From their description it reads that these monstrous creatures resemble massive, painfully swollen humans with randomly reconfigured body parts. They also have spines protruding from their skin which they can launch at enemies. Thankfully though, they can only do so at relatively short range, so we should hopefully have enough of an advantage. Discovering the Gorehulk has also unlocked the Bliss Lobotomy, a surgery procedure that can make a person happier, albeit costing them the ability to perform skilled labor as well as the intellectual skill. Now, as you can see, the Gorehulks here might look monstrous and fleshy, but they actually go down relatively quickly. Even Elpis joins the fight, although a little late and without a weapon. Nonetheless, our combined firepower is enough to kill 1 and down 4 of the creatures, and this now brings us to a very interesting moment, because those Gorehulks that are downed we could capture, and then we could study them. However, I think we'll leave that for the next episode. Suffice it to say that our exploration of the void has only just begun, and I have absolutely no idea where it's going to take us. So for today, let's make the cut at this point. However, before we completely wrap things up, we once again have some fan art to look at. A big thank you goes out to Maiso, Isaac Young, Olivier, Corrupted Muse, and Rakunoni. The piece by Isaac Young, by the way, depicting an alternate reality, a reality where Tuk and Squigs accompanied their children to the sea ice, and I have to admit that would be interesting to see too. Now, while we marvel at all of these wonderful creations, let me just quickly remind you that you can of course still donate to the PBI fundraiser. You can find all information about that in the thingy somewhere around this video. And finally, if you have some fan art to submit yourself, then you can either send me an email to pete@petecomplete.com, or if you support me over on Patreon, then you should also have access to the Pete Complete Discord, where you can post and discuss your artwork with others. And that's it for today, so let us now officially wrap things up at this point. Again, thank you all so much for the lovely artwork, and I hope that all of you watching have enjoyed the episode, and if you did, then I would be very happy if you could leave a thumbs up. If you like what I'm doing and want to support me and my channel further, then you can of course go ahead and subscribe to stay up to date, grab some merch over on shop.petecomplete.com, or check out and maybe even pledge to the Pete Complete Patreon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.